Imagine driving through your own neighborhood and seeing your face on a billboard accused of abandoning the very people you had sacrificed everything for. That was how the world came to know me, through lies and bold red letters. But the truth did not begin with that banner. It began months earlier, on Thanksgiving Day, when my own son told me there was no place for me at his table. In an instant, the familiar world collapsed. It all began that evening when I crossed the threshold of Andrew's house in Lincoln Park. I had no idea that within a few hours my life would shatter into pieces. The leather armchair creaked under my weight, a sound that once meant comfort and family. I spoke with enthusiasm about preparing my sage stuffing. It was Evelyn's favorite recipe, the one she always called a true family tradition. I imagined myself in their kitchen again, as if Evelyn still stood beside me. I pictured laughter around the table, gratitude, and warmth. Andrew sat next to me on the leather sofa I had helped him pay for. His wedding band caught the light, another item bought with my money. But his posture was tense, his shoulders stiff, his hands restless. Then came the words that turned my world upside down. I was not welcome for Thanksgiving. At first I thought I misheard, but he could not meet my eyes. His gaze slid to the marble coffee table I had purchased last spring. His voice trembled as he explained that Mallory's parents would be there. They preferred that I stay away, he said. It would be easier for everyone. I knew the kind of people they were. With each word his tone softened, almost ashamed. He looked away quickly, unable to face me. I glanced around the room that carried 10 years of my sacrifices. Ivory silk curtains I had bought for their privacy. Brazilian walnut floors paid for with a second mortgage. Intricate moldings charged to a credit card with months of interest that I alone covered. Every inch of that house stood on my back and on my money. I repeated his phrase about special traditions. Andrew winced and asked me not to make it harder. Through the archway I saw a shiny mixer on the counter. It cost $2,000 and became a decoration after 3 weeks of use. I asked where I was supposed to spend Thanksgiving.
This isn't just a story, it's a confession, whispered into the dark. If you leave your marker comment, I'll like it shows the Redditor-X-Tales family you were really here listening. And when you subscribe and tap the bell, you're not just supporting this channel, you're helping this story find someone who truly needs it. We at Redditor-X-Tales are grateful you're here.
The road home stretched out before me like a ribbon of memories. The heater hummed, fighting the November cold, as I slowly drove through the familiar streets of South Hills. Every turn carried the memory of the man I used to be. The man who believed that family meant everything, the man ready to give away his last dollar. That man turned out to be a naive fool. And as you already understand, I had become a walking ATM for my son. Numbers spun in my head like a broken slot machine. $2,800 every month, 5 years in a row. $168,000 handed to my son. More than my wife Evelyn and I had saved for our retirement in an entire lifetime. Gone. Simply gone. The light turned green, and I pressed the gas harder than I should have. The pickup responded with a growl that matched my mood. There was 5th Street, where I mortgaged our home. Our home with Evelyn pledged to cover Andrew's down payment. The loan officer looked at me with pity that I did not recognize back then. He warned me I was risking everything for someone else's investment. Not for my son's future. Not for the safety of the family. For someone else's investment. And then came Lincoln Street, the bank where I took out a second mortgage when Andrew lost his job 2 years ago. He had promised it was only temporary. Mallory stood behind him with a $700 purse on her shoulder, nodding with sympathy. I pulled into my cracked driveway, the porch light flickering from a repair I kept postponing. Inside, the house felt empty without family, without Evelyn, without the warmth of gatherings that would never happen again. The phone rang as I fumbled with the keys. The sharp sound echoed against the bare walls. Mallory's name lit up the screen. Most likely, she wanted to explain why I was unworthy of her parents' delicate presence. I answered on the 4th ring, letting her wonder long enough if I would pick up at all. Her voice used false sweetness, the same tone she used when asking me to cover the water bill or property taxes. She mentioned hearing about a misunderstanding with Andrew. I knew immediately there had been no misunderstanding. She had made her position clear long ago. Mallory began to explain that it might sound cruel, but I should understand her parents' perspective. They were very traditional people. They expected a certain atmosphere during the holidays. While rose in my throat. an atmosphere without someone like me at their table. A pause stretched between us. I could hear the rustle of shopping bags in the background. Most likely she was spending money that should have gone toward their mortgage. Then she said the words that shattered the last fragments of my patience. Her parents were not used to my style of cooking. All that spicy Mexican food and loud music. And she added they were educated people. They expected conversations about current events, literature, and art. Her words struck like a blow. My style of cooking. I reminded myself that I had built a business from nothing after my father's death, that I had provided work for more than 50 people. But money was not everything, she implied. Upbringing mattered. Education mattered. Then she crossed the final line. She said that Evelyn understood her place better than I ever did. The world stopped. She crushed that line beneath her designer heels. She dared to bring up my late wife. My Evelyn, who was 1,000 times more noble than the entire Mallory family combined. Cold pierced me from head to toe. I knew the conversation was over. I set the phone down on the counter, carefully as if it carried poison. Soon you will learn what happened next. Andrew turned pale and suggested Aunt Dorothy. Or maybe we could meet the weekend after, he said, as if Thanksgiving could be rescheduled like a meeting. I stood up, my body heavy with years and pain. My heart ached, my back throbbed, my joints cracked. Without another word, I moved to the door. Andrew called after me, but I kept walking. I passed the family photos, the closet full of coats worth more than my monthly spending. My hand touched the cold brass of the doorknob. Without looking back, I wished Mallory's parents a happy holiday in his stead. The November air stung with its clarity as I reached my battered pickup. Behind me, Andrew's voice trembled with desperation. Then the final click of the door ended it all. I sat behind the wheel, staring at the warm lights of other homes. My old phone vibrated, but I ignored it. I turned the key. The engine shook like my soul. In that moment, I understood I was nothing but a resource to them. Over 10 years, I had given them $250,000. And now they discarded me as though my sacrifices meant nothing. I had filled their home with abundance, yet I was unwelcome at their table. They thought me unworthy to sit at the table I had paid for. But this was only the beginning. They underestimated one thing about this old fool. I was still a father. Yet fathers know not only how to forgive, but also how to punish. Documents lay on my kitchen table like evidence at a crime scene. 5 years of bank statements, each showing the same automatic transfer. $2,800 on the 15th of every month, gone from my account, swallowed by theirs. A paper trail of my own foolishness. I picked up the calculator, my fingers trembling with the weight of realization. The first year, $33,600. The second, another $33,600. The third, I stopped buying new clothes for myself. The fourth, discount stores. The fifth, peanut butter for lunch instead of real meals. $168,000. The number hung in the air like a tombstone. And that did not even include the down payment. It did not include the utility bills I covered when Mallory's shopping spiraled out of control. It did not include the new roof, the landscaping, the furniture necessary for their lifestyle. My insurance melted into their marble countertops. My retirement savings disappeared into their hardwood floors. The small fund for future grandchildren vanished into designer curtains and professional mixers. Everything went into my son's family and the house where I was unwelcome on Thanksgiving. My throat went dry. I reached for the phone and dialed the bank. The automated system greeted me in English and Spanish. So considerate for people like me. The operator answered with professional calm. No judgment, no questions about why a 64-year-old man was ending financial support for his son. I explained the purpose of my call to cancel the automatic transfers. Cancel them immediately. My voice sounded steadier than I expected. The operator requested verification details. I gave her the numbers, each one burned into my memory. The clicks of her keyboard echoed like a countdown to freedom. The transfer appeared on her screen, $2,800 each month. 5 years of steady payments. She confirmed the details. I looked around my kitchen while she worked. Outdated appliances. Walls in need of paint. Windows that let in the cold. all of it neglected because I had been feeding someone else's wallet instead of my own home. The operation was complete. The transfer was cancelled. For the first time in 5 years I could breathe. For the first time since Evelyn's death, the next month would not be a fight for survival. I could fix the porch light. I could buy real food. I gathered every document, bank statements, mortgage papers, receipts, every proof of sacrifice. I stacked them neatly and carried them to the fireplace. I struck a match. The flame caught. The phone vibrated. A message appeared. Most likely Andrew with excuses or Mallory with another demand for money to buy decorative pillows. I did not look at the screen. Instead, I opened the bottle of good whiskey, the one I had saved for a special occasion that never came. I poured a heavy measure into a crystal glass. It was Evelyn's gift on our 20th anniversary. I raised it toward her photograph on the mantel. I thanked her for the clarity, for the freedom, for the strength to stop feeding those who deemed me unworthy of crumbs from their table. The whiskey burned my throat with bitterness, but in my chest something new began to grow. Not just relief, a cold anticipation. Money had been only the beginning. For 10 years I had allowed them to turn me into an ATM. I had allowed them to insult Evelyn's memory. I had allowed myself to feel unwanted in the house I paid for. Now it was time for a real lesson. A lesson about what happens when you bite the hand that feeds you. And this lesson would become their nightmare, because every single day would remind them of me. The next morning arrived sharp and clear. The November sunlight streamed through my kitchen windows as I slowly sipped a second cup of coffee. The phone rang at exactly 10:47. Mallory's name flashed on the screen like a warning sign. Her voice carried that familiar false sweetness, honeyed notes masking the metallic taste of demand. She explained that I needed to pick up her parents from Spokane Airport. Their flight from Portland was scheduled to land at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Cold spread slowly through my veins. I set the cup down carefully, watching the steam rise in the morning light. Did she truly believe that last night had never happened? That humiliation could be erased, and I would return to the role of obedient servant. Mallory continued speaking without waiting for my agreement. She spoke as if I were their hired driver, as if my time, my car, and my patience belonged to them by birthright. Less than a day after declaring me unworthy of their refined company, she was demanding favors again. Then she delivered the words that sealed her fate. She said I simply needed to get in my car and carry it out. A strange cold spread in my chest, not anger, but something far more dangerous. The calculating calm of a predator who finally saw his prey in the trap. She listed every detail of the flight Delta Air number 447 arriving at 2 o'clock in the baggage claim area. Each detail sounded like an order, not a request. Then came the final humiliation. I reminded to dress appropriately. Perhaps that bright shirt I had worn to Andrew's graduation. Her parents noticed such things. Even when asking for a service, she could not resist controlling every detail. My appearance had to meet their standards. Respectable enough not to embarrass them, but still modest enough to remind me of my place. I acted as though I agreed and would take care of it. My voice carried no sarcasm, no resistance. Only the submissiveness she expected to hear. She ended the call without thanks or farewell, the way one dismisses staff. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the darkened screen of the phone. The clock read 10:52. The flight would arrive at 2 o'clock. I looked up at the clock above the sink. Plenty of time for what I had in mind. I poured another cup of coffee, added an extra spoonful of sugar, and opened yesterday's newspaper. The crossword waited, unfinished from the night before. 7 across, delayed satisfaction, 12 letters. The answer would come to me, as would all the others. Today they would learn a simple truth. The one they considered weak and despised had always been the most dangerous opponent. Their lesson began today, a lesson they would never forget. At 2:15 in the afternoon I sat in my favorite chair. A fresh cup of Earl Grey and the Sunday issue of the Cascade Times rested in my hands. The November sun angled through my living room windows. It warmed the space where I had spent so many lonely evenings. The silence felt different that day. Deserved. My phone vibrated on the wooden surface. Mallory's name appeared. I let it ring until the end. Then again. A text appeared about her parents at the airport. I turned the phone face down and returned to the sports section. The Lakers had lost again. Some things in life never change. By 3:30, the calls became a constant buzzing. Unknown numbers mixed with Mallory's name, likely her parents calling. I stood and unplugged the landline from a wall. Then I powered off the cell phone completely. Perfect silence covered the house like a warm blanket. I made myself a grilled cheese sandwich and heated a can of tomato soup. A simple meal, yet every dollar spent on groceries meant fewer dollars for their lifestyle. The cheese melted into golden perfection. The soup steamed in my favorite mug. Outside, the winter sun was already beginning to set. Across town, 3 people stood at the airport parking lot. They argued about the price of a taxi and wondered how their personal servant dared to fail them. That thought alone made the soup taste even better. By 5 o'clock I reached for the remote. Then came the pounding at the front door. Not knocking, pounding. Aggressive blow shook the frame. Through the peephole I saw 3 figures crowded on the porch like a pack of hungry wolves. I opened the door. Richard Brown's face burned an inch from mine. His grey hair was disheveled, his expensive tie hung crooked, sheds mixed with accusations about waiting 3 hours at the airport. Their words demanded how I dared insult them with such audacity. His wife Judith trailed behind him. Her perfect hairstyle had collapsed into chaos, her lips pressed into a thin line of hatred. Her outrage overflowed. For her, my behavior was barbaric and unworthy of a civilized man. Behind them appeared Mallory. Her designer coat was wrinkled, her accusations falling like hail. She insisted that I had humiliated them. Her parents had to spend $240 on a taxi because of me. Less than one dinner they had enjoyed at a restaurant paid for with my money. The chorus of fury swelled until I cut through with my own voice. It was colder than the November air. This was my home, and they had to leave immediately. Silence fell, heavy as a thundercloud. Richard was the first to recover. His face turned purple with rage. His indignation rose to new heights, insisting I had no right to demand anything after such an insult. Judith nodded. Her smile sharpened like broken glass. Her words carried a warning. My actions would have public consequences. Mallory pulled her father toward the car. Her eyes threw contempt at me, her words dismissing me as a pitiful old man unworthy of their time. They left the porch like a defeated army. But Richard turned back at the threshold. His eyes burned with revenge. I closed the door and turned the lock. Through the window I watched them disappear into the November darkness. They were still arguing with each other as they faded away, but their threats stuck like a splinter in my mind. In a small town, reputation means everything, and they had a weapon more dangerous than anger. Connections influence the power to shape public opinion with a single phone call. I poured myself a whiskey and turned on an old western. On the screen, good always defeated evil. Reality was more complicated than television fantasies. They were already planning something, and as it turned out, everything had only just begun. 3 days later I stepped out to collect the morning newspaper. What I saw froze the blood in my veins. Across the street, on the vacant lot where an old car dealership billboard once stood, a new structure towered above me. A massive banner the size of a highway sign loomed over Maple Avenue. On it was my face taken from an old family photograph and blown up to monstrous proportions. Around it, in large red letters, the sign declared me a man who abandons those who depend on him. Smaller text added fabricated details. It claimed I had left an elderly couple stranded at the airport during a snowstorm. At the bottom was a warning not to have any dealings with me. Maple Avenue was the main artery of our neighborhood. Thousands drove through it every day on their way to work and home. Now each one of them saw my face surrounded by accusations that branded me. At the nearby traffic light the spectacle truly began. A woman in a blue SUV aimed a phone at the banner, ready to share the scandal online. The passengers on the bus twisted their faces with disgust toward the stranger they had never met. They had already condemned me in their minds. A teenager on a bicycle stopped directly in front of my house. He studied the banner and then looked at me with the kind of contempt only children can express when they believe they are right. I stood on my own driveway feeling like I had been placed on a medieval pillory. Every stair left invisible scars. Every turn that I had toward me carried pain. Jim Harrison, my neighbor of 20 years, drove by in his pickup. He quickly turned his head away and pressed down on the gas pedal. He acted as if I were contagious. Mrs. Collins from across the street peeked through her curtains. The moment she saw me, she retreated and disappeared inside. A minute later she was on the phone. She gestured toward my house as she spoke, occasionally glancing at me with narrowed eyes. I bent down and picked up the newspaper from the porch. Cascade Times, the publication I had read for years. On the front page was a short note about a local businessman whose behavior had unsettled residents. The real blow waited inside. A full article under a screaming headline demanded justice on behalf of concerned citizens. The author, Patricia Morrison, a journalist I had never even met, had compiled an entire dossier. She used anonymous sources who described me as unpredictable and dangerous toward their elderly. Each sentence landed like a scalpel cutting into my name. The silence of the house broke with the piercing ring of the telephone. Unknown numbers lit up the display one after another. Calls poured in like hail. Women's voices, men's voices, all demanding I be isolated from decent society. Every new caller added another drop of poison to the swelling ocean of hatred. By noon I had disconnected the home phone and switched off the mobile. But the banner still hung outside. It was a modern-day pillar of shame. My name was becoming a synonym for betrayal in the minds of thousands of strangers. Decades of impeccable work, hundreds of satisfied clients destroyed. Now people knew me only through a vinyl sheet the size of a house. The worst part was the cynical lie woven into the accusations. By evening I understood the brilliance of their plan. In the age of instant judgment, one banner was enough to turn a respected man into an outcast. But they had made one fatal mistake. That night I sat in my dark living room, staring at the glowing windows of neighbors who now believed I was a monster. My own relatives wanted to present me as a beast before the entire city. But soon everyone would see who the real predator was. Their lies would collapse. Tomorrow would mark my move in this game, and from that moment it would only become more interesting. The next morning I woke with the sensation of having spent the night in a boxing ring. In my eyes burned the cold, calculating fire of revenge. Coffee scorched my throat as I sat in the kitchen planning my counterattack. Outside the window the cursed banner still hung, but it no longer looked like a sentence. Now it was a challenge that I accepted. If they wanted a war on the streets, they would have won. I spent the morning systematically gathering my arsenal. 10 years of bank statements lay across the table like cards in a game of death. Every transfer, every check, every receipt for bills I had paid, every screenshot of their Facebook boasting all became evidence. The numbers added up to an astronomical sum. Almost $250,000 of my own blood-earned dollars transferred to people who now called me a monster. A snapshot of the new kitchen with marble countertops paid for with my home loan. A restaurant selfie captioned with indulgence taken on the very day I covered the bill. A photograph of $800 designer shoes posted an hour after a tearful plea for help with the mortgage. By noon I had assembled a presentation that could blast the world to pieces. The idea was ready in my head. The first step had already been taken. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I had not called in 2 years. Mark Rodriguez, the owner of Digital Street Agency, owed me. I had saved his business from bankruptcy when the banks refused to extend his credit. At first his voice was cautious. He had seen the banner, he had read the newspaper. But as I laid out the truth, his tone changed. Mark had known me for 15 years. He knew who I really was. An hour later I sat in his office at River Park Square. The compromising evidence spread across the glass table in the conference room. Mark studied each page carefully. He had an idea better than a static banner. An electronic billboard with rotating slides directly across from the slanderous display. Every 30 seconds a new dose of truth would shine in bold colors and large letters. The first slide, a headline declaring the truth about the Brown family. The second, a screenshot of the bank transfer for $237,468, captioned as money sent over 10 years by the groom's father. The third, a photo of Mallory with designer bags placed beside my receipt for the mortgage payment. The fourth, the social media post about hard work and dessert success, contrasted with documents showing who actually paid the bills. The fifth, a photograph of Evelyn in her architecture studio, with words reminding that she never knew her place, she created places. The last slide destroyed everything. A huge family portrait of Mallory, Andrew, and her parents in front of the house I had financed. The caption read that I had paid for this luxury. It stated that full documents were available to journalists, bloggers, and independent media, along with a QR code for proof. Mark promised to have the billboard up at dawn the next day, right on the vacant lot across from theirs. Anyone stopped at the traffic light could scan the code and see every document. That night I did not sleep. I imagined the morning to come. Mallory stepping out for her newspaper only to see the rotating truth. Her perfect face twisting with horror as she realized that the entire internet would soon know their dirty secret. They thought they had destroyed me with one static banner. Tomorrow the city would see, and soon after the entire internet. The next morning dawned sharp and cold. The sky over Spokane was pale grey, as if the city itself sensed what was about to happen. I stood in my yard with a cup of coffee. Across the street, the electronic billboard flickered to life. The first slide lit up the neighborhood. A bold headline declared that the Brown family's wealth was built on my sacrifices. Every 30 seconds the truth rotated. A bank statement with $237,468 in transfers. A photo of Mallory flaunting designer bags. Beside it was my receipt for the mortgage payment. An image of Evelyn at her desk in the architecture studio. The words reminded everyone that she never knew her place, she created places. The last slide displayed their perfect family portrait. Beneath it, a line explained that I had paid for that luxury. A QR code glowed in the corner. Anyone at the traffic light could scan it and see the full set of documents. At 7 o'clock, curious neighbors gathered on the sidewalks. By 8, the crowd grew into dozens. By 9, journalists had arrived with cameras and microphones. The show was in full force. The Browns stepped onto their porch one by one. Richard appeared first, his grey hair disheveled, his expensive robe hanging loosely. His eyes darted toward the billboard. Each new slide struck him like a hammer. Judith followed. Her lips twisted, her usual elegance gone. Mallory stumbled out in a robe, her makeup smeared from a sleepless night. She tried to cover her face, but it was too late. The cameras captured everything. The crowd grew louder with every slide. Neighbors whispered, strangers shouted. Some laughed, others recorded videos. Andrew stood motionless, frozen as if struck by a sledgehammer. His once proud stance crumbled before my eyes. The Browns had built their image on lies. Now those lies dissolved under the harsh light of truth. I knew the entire block was buzzing like a festival. Cars stopped, people pointed, and phones lit up with notifications. The courthouse of public opinion had opened right on Maple Avenue, and the verdict was being delivered every 30 seconds. I stood at my fence, invisible among the crowd. The November air was crisp and cool against my skin. This was only the beginning of their fall. The city now knew who they really were, and soon the entire world would know. 3 months later I stood on the same driveway. The world around me had changed beyond recognition. My son's house stood empty, its windows hollow like vacant eyes. The Brown family had disappeared from Spokane as suddenly as they once appeared. A for sale sign swayed in the spring wind. It was the last reminder of their presence here. The morning air was fresh, filled with the scent of blooming apple trees. I sipped coffee, letting the warmth sink into me. My bank account had changed in an unexpected way. A week after the scandal, Andrew's lawyer contacted me. Shaken by the scale of the lies he had lived in, my son filed for divorce. He also demanded financial restitution. $83,000 had already arrived in my account. Another $154,000 would come over the next 5 years. Not the entire fortune loss, but enough to prove that honesty prevails. Andrew visited every weekend. The first meetings were painful. We both had to learn how to rebuild a relationship cleansed of Mallory and her family's poison. He admitted the truth of those years. Mallory had poisoned his mind with daily complaints about my persistence and unworthiness. Step by step they drove us apart. They turned my generosity into a source of shame. Now Andrew rented a small apartment downtown. He had found work at an architecture firm and was slowly restoring his self-esteem. Sometimes he brought flowers to Evelyn's grave, a place he had avoided for years. Forgiveness came gradually, like dawn after a long night. Iskay Times published a full retraction of their article. They offered me an official apology. The sweetest reward was silence. No more calls asking for money. No more demands to cover someone else's debts. No more humiliating reminders that I should be grateful for scraps of attention. Neighbors greeted me over the fence again. Jim Harrison even apologized for his reaction to that cursed banner. Many in the neighborhood had read my story. Now they knew the truth. Aunt Dorothy moved in with me a month ago. At 72 she remained lively and full of energy. Her presence filled the house with warmth that had been missing for years. We cooked together, watched old movies, and played cards in the evenings. Simple joys worth more than any luxury. Yesterday she brought me a letter from Mallory in Phoenix. A short note with no apology. She asked me to forget the past and not interfere with her new life in a travel agency. Even now she did not understand what she had done. She still considered herself a victim of circumstance. This morning Andrew called with news. He was seeing a woman named Sarah, an elementary school teacher. Hope trembled in his voice. He feared I might repeat past mistakes by interfering in his personal life. I reassured him that I would welcome her, but never impose my opinion. We both had learned much over these months. He had learned the importance of protecting loved ones from toxic people. I had learned that love does not mean financial dependence. Respect cannot be bought with money. My bank account no longer bleeds each month. My son speaks to me again as a father, not as an ATM. My reputation has been restored. No one insults Evelyn's memory anymore. At 64 years old, I finally understood a simple truth. Dignity cannot be purchased, but it can be defended. Sometimes it requires a war. Sometimes it requires only the courage to say no to those who are used to hearing yes.
Hey. That's it. Today's story comes to an end. And honestly, thank you from the heart of the Redditor-X-Tales family for staying with us until the very last word. We at Redditor-X-Tales love to know what you think really. Share your thoughts in the comments below. We read them all. And trust me, your words mean more than you realize. If you're hungry for more, the full playlist is waiting in the description. And don't worry, new true stories are already on the way. The Redditor-X-Tales family can't wait to share them with you. If this journey touched you even a little, hit subscribe and tap the bell so you'll never miss the next story. Once again, thank you for listening. Until next time, take care.